This is Tom Reardon along with Ed Carey, and we're joining you from inside of Harvard Yard in Cambridge for the annual meeting of the Harvard Alumni Association. And Ed, we're back once again on just an absolutely splendid day in Cambridge.
Couldn't be nicer, Tom. I think the morning exercises, I watched them on this channel, and that went smoothly. I guess everybody is awaiting the arrival of the degree candidates, now degree recipients, and their families back.
Well, it's a splendid day, and it was this morning as well, and the sort of just feel of the place is alive and positive and vibrant. This is, of course, the 25th reunion of the class of 1969, and there had been early speculation as to just how that class would mature and grow in age. 1969 was a lively time in Cambridge, and toward the spring of 1969, it was difficult. But in any event, they have come back, and I would say the spirit is enormously positive.
I noticed, Tom, that a number of the symposia focus on what they were and what they are now and how they view life, both the 50th and the 25th. And last year, of course, we had General Colin Powell, and at that time there was speculation that there might be some resistance to having a military address. But here we have Vice President Gore, or in these familial surroundings known as Al, to all of his Harvard friends, and he is addressing his class, which went through quite a bit of turmoil, as you mentioned, in '69, and also addressing the class of '44, another class that was unfortunately involved in what one calls, I guess now, after the Normandy Memorial, a popular war, if there is such a thing.
Well, we've been watching the procession coming in of the alumni. Processions are a very significant part of these day-long festivities at Harvard. The commencement exercises in the morning begin with a procession led by the seniors from the college and then through the graduate schools. And now we see alumni from the classes dating all the way back to about 1913, I guess. Is that?
Yes. The oldest alumnus, Fred Crawford, led the procession this morning, and presumably he will this afternoon. They have a tree spread over in the old yard for once you reach the 50th reunion and you have nowhere to go for commencement day. There's what they call a tree spread for post 50th. In other words, if you've been out 50 years, you can go to the tree spread by invitation, I gather. And that was packed today. I went over and visited, and it's always fun to see those fellows. Lots of them are just getting together for the first time. The last time they met was here, the same place, same time next year, as they say.
Well, there we see marshals that are sort of stationed throughout the yard to try to keep the flow moving. The idea is to get this procession completed in about 20 minutes, and we have uneven success in that, I would say, from year to year. Occasionally we do. We're advantaged today with good weather. That makes the milling about somewhat slower, but on the other hand, in the rain, it's hard to marshal the people at all. So I think today we seem to be about on course at the moment. As you can see, it's not what you would call a rigid militaristic affair here. This morning there were 5,335 degrees awarded to various candidates in all of the university. It is interesting that this is one of the few convocations that is truly university-wide in terms of all of the faculties and all of the graduates. The graduates go back to either their school or houses for the awarding of degrees. And Ed, how does that work?
Well, I'm familiar most with the college, and if you happen to be in, say, Leverett House, you're a graduating senior from Leverett House or Elliott House, you leave here and you go back to the courtyard at your house where there's a more personal presentation to you of your degree with a smaller and more closely knit group of friends and family there. It works out very well. It used to slow down the afternoon a bit if graduating seniors of the college were coming back. But the morning ceremonies today were right on time all the way through and finished at, I believe, 11:30. which should give us a good opportunity to recapture many of them who don't have too far to drive.
Coming down now on your screen is the bagpiper who is leading the 25th reunion class of 1969. I do not think the Vice President intends to march with the class. It has been awkward for him to really get into the kind of activities given the amount of security, and a number of those are right down below us, as a matter of fact. So I think he has tried to get as much out of this reunion as one, realistically can with those kind of constraints. In addition to the 5,335 degrees conferred on various graduates this morning, there were also 9 honorary degree recipients. One of those, of course, as is the tradition, is the Speaker, Al Gore. And he, as we have mentioned continuously, is a member of the class of 1969, and upon graduation entered the military and was then a reporter for a period of time before running for Congress and then ultimately the Senate from Tennessee. He had followed taking the congressional seat held by his father for a long time. Then he ran for president several years ago and decided not to run again 2 years ago when the opportunity presented itself, and ended up on the ticket, of course, with Bill Clinton and ultimately the vice presidency.
I think they're trying to expedite the alumni procession this year, Tom. They're bringing the 25th and the 35th in at 2 separate aisles from the center aisle. In other words, the older alums, I guess, probably hold up things a bit. I noticed the 25th and 35th are coming in now.
Much more of a crack military group.
Absolutely.
25th and 35th.
Well, we're already up to the class of 1922, I noticed, so there can't be many left. And on your screen, you have someone leads each class with a placard, so if you follow that number, that's where we are on the way to 1994. That was 1929, I believe.
Do the seniors march as a group in the parade? Are they considered alumni since
They are
they've been
considered alumni?
degree recipients for a matter of hours?
Now, why do you ask such a question?
I'm just testing your knowledge.
Well, folks, as you know, that Mr. Reardon is Director of Development here at Harvard University, and as soon as they receive their degrees, in fact, before they receive their degrees...
Right. In the degree case is a little pledge card.
Exactly. So for him to ask me whether they are, in fact, target, shall we say, they are, right, as of now. Some of them do. It's a busy day for them, and I think there are so many tugs on their loyalties. They have family here, Aunt Bessie from Maine and Uncle Louie from New York, and they want to spend time with them and get back here too. And it's a bit of a tug on all their priorities.
Well, it used to be the case that all honorary degree recipients were kept tight secret, and that's still the case today, but that included the commencement speaker as well. And several years ago, they began to realize that knowing who the speaker would be might well increase visibility and therefore attendance in the afternoon session. So a number of years ago, they began to make it public in advance who the speaker would be, and I think that has improved attendance.
I think it has. I think, it's a correlation of weather as well, but we have not had a California dew afternoon for some time, have we?
No, we have not. We've the old expression, "it never rains on a Harvard commencement," certainly has been tested. I think that initial observation was made by a person who sat on the platform under a tent, and of course it didn't rain where he was or she was. But I think that we've had some pretty soggy commencements over the years, but certainly none could be more splendid than today. Class of 44, Ed, is drifting into the screen.
Well, class of 44. We have, these reunions actually don't happen just by giving out a packet. There's a crew at Wadsworth House that worked very hard. Marion Briefer, Diane Jellis, Kathy Fazzolaro, and I'm sure I'm left off 3 or 4.
It's an amazing piece of work, and Marion Briefer, you mentioned, who has been running the 25th reunion for years, is stepping down at the end of this year, and I think people are very nervous about how she can ever be replaced.
Do you have anybody particular in mind?
I do not.
Your brother, perhaps?
I would think if he were smart, he'd try to delay her retirement for another 10 years. Marion has done a remarkable job, and I think is one of these people who, while absolutely infallible on detail, is also relaxed and always affable, responsive, and terrific with alumni.
She's wonderful.
We seem to be making progress. I think perhaps the point you made, Ed, of trying to move classes on more than one aisle
It is sort
has
of
shown
like
some
having,
promise.
It's sort of like having, Sword, Juneau, Omaha, and, a number of beaches from which to approach this landing spot here to hear Vice President Kaur.
The ceremonies will be conducted today by the president of the Harvard Alumni Association, Sharon Gagnon, who is from Alaska. Sharon has been on the HAA for a number of years now, and I think has almost a perfect attendance record coming down from Alaska. She has been a terrific leader for the HAA, and she'll be presiding, and I think the first matter of business will be Bob Stone, who will give a report on Harvard's finances, or at least the fundraising side. Harvard, about 3 weeks ago, announced the beginning of a $2.1 billion capital campaign. And so Bob will have a progress report on how things are going on that front.
This is a university, as you said, though, Tom, this is a university-wide campaign, which is something new and much broader scope.
It is. It's the first time that the university has tried to coordinate fundraising across the entire spectrum of the university, and it's been not uncomplicated, but it's been very rewarding, and I think it has grown out of an academic planning process that has involved all of the deans and many of the academic leaders of the community in trying to identify common problems and opportunities, common approaches to problems, and I think on balance it has worked extremely well. There has been sort of a tendency to try to characterize what's going on as reducing the level of decentralization and increasing to some extent the centralization, and I think that's not what's going on at all. It really is to try to promote a better understanding within the institution and among its parts about what one another does. So it's more like integration than it is.
Well, it gives you an opportunity, I would imagine, for some wonderful proposals that would encompass 3 or 4 faculties.
Exactly. The potential of Harvard is, of course, enhanced significantly by greater interaction among the parts. And I think increasingly faculty, administrators, academic leaders realize that that potential exists, and there's a real interest on the part of the faculty as well as the leadership in trying to explore that. So it's not uncomplicated, and it won't be simple, but the progress is measurable.
Well, as you said, it's always been perceived as every tub on its own bottom. So if an alumnus had gone to the college and the law school, he had to more or less select, or he or she, had to select sort of one or the other as their preferred choice. This gives them an opportunity to do with one hit, and a bigger one, I suppose, both of them.
As you will hear when Bob Stone gives his report, this has been a terrific year for the Harvard College Fund and for all these classes. Most of the reunion classes at all levels, starting with the 5th reunion, have set major records. So it's been a good year. I think it's been aided by the campaign, but it's been very good leadership that's been a very important part of the success.
My understanding, Tom, I had visits from several members of the class of 44 that were you at the symposium the other evening, or the reception they had with the president and Dean Jeremy Knowles?
No, he was not.
I gather that they did a marvelous job of just making class of 44 feel just so warm about Harvard, and this guy came from 2 wives, and that's always the best, because they're usually the ones who say, oh, don't write that big a check, please. But they all just praised the speech and the repartee between the classmates and the dean and the president of Harvard.
There we see, what do you call a female marshal? Are they referred to as all marshals, or?
Marshalless? No. I think that's...
Marshal is a gender-neutral term?
It's gender equity, yes. Or whatever we...
So 3 marshals standing on the platform waiting for the various dignitaries to arrive so that seating can begin. We are running a tad slow. So our innovations, I think, have aided but not solved the time problem.
I'll tell you, Tom, you mentioned that it's running a little slow, but it's also a big crowd today. This is probably as big a crowd as we've had in a number of years. They're still coming in. It's filled all the way up front here. Over to the side it is not, but the classes are still processing.
Well, there couldn't be a nicer place to be today. It's an absolutely gorgeous day, and the program promises to be interesting. I think people are interested in what Al Gore has to say. It's an interesting perspective to come from a very troubled time in the period of 1969 and be part of a class that was divided at that time, and to come back as Vice President of the United States is an interesting kind of experience for him, I think, and people are interested in his sort of perspective on that.
Well, and added to that, Tom, has been the picture of the White House, where you've had the President of the country going to represent U.S. at the Normandy ceremonies, and you have a Vietnam combat veteran, Al Gore, and I'm sure he must have some discussions among his classmates when he gets back here about 1969 and what all happened then.
The tolling of the bells is supposed to suggest that we should be getting going, but there's still plenty of empty seats on the stage, so I would expect that it'll be a bit of a time. There's a good shot of the steeple of Memorial Church, the repository of these rather large bells. You can see the procession continues to wind its way toward the stage. We begin to see coming right down near the stage now the president of the Alumni Association, followed by the governing boards, first the corporation, and then the overseers behind that, so that there should be...
We are about to...
Here on your screen, the Radcliffe leadership, President Linda Wilson, as you can see. Along with the leadership of the Radcliffe Board and Administration. Again, the Harvard Overseers following behind that. We will have news today of the newly elected Overseers, as well as the newly elected directors of the Harvard Alumni Association. Both overseers and alumni directors are chosen by ballot by all Harvard alumni. It is the only wholly elected board in the country. All overseers are elected. There are 5 elected each year for a 6-year term. This year, 4 will be rotating off the board.
We also, I noticed Hank Vander up there, and he's one of them, Ray Levites. They're 2 of the recipients of the Harvard Alumni Medals this afternoon for their distinguished service to the Harvard community, both in their home areas of Connecticut, Chicago, Naples, Florida, and in Cambridge.
And the third medalist is Peter Heller. There's Peter just on the left-hand side of your screen. Peter has been head of the Alumni Association. He's been an overseer at Harvard. He has been on any number of visiting committees. He was a lawyer in New York who took retirement to pursue his musical interests. An accomplished musician. And in the center of the screen, Ray Levites, who is Mr. Harvard basketball.
Such a pleasant day with, nice dry air, sunny, that everybody is socializing. Once they reach the stage, they really don't want to go to their assigned seat until they've at least cast 3 or 4 votes.
It's important to remember that for many of these people, they see one another once a year, and in some cases once every 5 years, so it's a little difficult to impose rigid discipline on the...
It's impossible, I would say. Particularly knowing some of these people, they're not going to move till they get finished with that story.
There's been an unusual level of security around, I think, both Vice President Gore and Justice Blackmun, but it has not been offensive. There are large numbers of security agents, but it seems to me that they have, on balance, handled everything very well. It is very difficult to balance the security needs of individual dignitaries against the free access and flow of a large alumni body that you're trying to have enjoy themselves and have freedom to come and go as they need. And on occasion, that can be abrasive. But I think in this set of both the reunion events and the commencement events, it has gone as well as you could possibly hope.
Well, it certainly has mellowed since 7 o'clock this morning when this yard was tight as a drum, and you really had to have someone else recognize you from the interior, and there were nobody in the interior, or you couldn't get in.
There you see
Paul Weissman in the middle behind President Rudenstein and Bob Stone. Paul of the, now what is Paul? Is he was former chairman of the HAA and head of the Harvard College Fund. I think Bob is trying to get Neil to make a pledge.
Neil has made a remarkably generous pledge. It was interesting, speaking about pledges, that both governing boards, by the time the drive kicked off, had made commitments to the drive. So the leadership of the institution has been very strongly supportive, which is very important to the success of an undertaking of this nature. Here we see the Vice President walking in. Again, you hear the cheers of the 25th reunion class because they are right on the stage or just off the stage and so have prior access. Now the rest of the assemblage can see his arrival. Basically, in order to maintain some sort of security, they often keep a commencement speaker requiring security in the Memorial Church while the assemblage gathers. And here you can see him going down and shaking hands with all of the institutional leadership. He's shaking hands now with Jeremy Knowles, who is on his right. Your left as you look at the... Jeremy is the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, which is the college and the graduate school. There's Sharon Gagnon, who is about, I think, to move to the podium.
Welcome. to the 1994 annual meeting of the Harvard Alumni Association. My name is Sharon Elliott Gagnon. I have the honor of serving as president of the Harvard Alumni Association, and I have the honor of calling the June 9th, 1994 meeting to order. This morning's procession and ceremony celebrated the achievement of approximately 6,000 graduates who received their degrees today from the college and the graduate and professional schools. This afternoon, we reunite to celebrate the alumni, to hear reports on the university and on university resources, and to welcome the new graduates into the lively, diverse, widespread, interesting group that is the Harvard Alumni Association. The procession, which just concluded, represents those 250,000 alumni and alumni who are found throughout the world, many of whom have traveled here today for their class reunions. 13 classes are here today in all, celebrating their reunions. 300 people are celebrating their 35th reunion, 500 their 50th reunion, and 700 are here for their 25th reunion. I am happy to report also that the class of 1924, chaired by Charles Colt, has gathered to celebrate its 70th reunion. Congratulations to all the classes, and thank you for the insights, the leadership, the creativity, and the fun you bring to alumni life, and to the continuation of the Harvard experience for both alumni and for students. I invite everyone to open this afternoon's celebration by standing and joining in the singing of Gaudeamus Igitur. It is a special privilege of the HA president to recognize individuals who are important to alumni activities as well as to Harvard. I will begin by recognizing the individual elected by his classmates to be Chief Marshal of the 25th reunion class, the class of 1969. He is the most frequently performed living American composer of concert music. Many of you will recognize his two award-winning operas, Nixon in China and The Death of Klinghoffer. the 1994 Chief Marshal, John Coolidge Adams. John, will you please stand? Years ago, at the time of his 50th reunion, Frederick Crawford wrote, "My philosophy of life is simple. Calvin Coolidge expressed it well. Do each day's task to the fullest, and the Lord will take care of tomorrow." The tasks Frederick Crawford set for himself have led to highest awards, to honorary degrees, and to election to the National Aviation Hall of Fame, as well as to the Business Hall of Fame and the Automobile Hall of Fame. Today, he is celebrating his 81st Harvard reunion. It is with greatest admiration and pride that we salute Frederick Crawford, class of 1913, 103 years old. Frederick is accompanied today by his wife, Kathleen S. Crawford. I would like to recognize also the oldest alumna in attendance from Newton Center, Massachusetts, a member of the class of 1920 and 94 years old, Evelyn Baird Hoffman is here today. There are many others whose contributions to Harvard Alumni Association programs during the last year have been invaluable. I would like to recognize and ask to stand the president of Radcliffe University, Linda Wilson. The Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, Jeremy Knowles. The Executive Director of the Harvard Alumni Association, Jack Reardon. And I would like to introduce next year's president of the Harvard Alumni Association, First Vice President Barry L. Williams from Oakland, California, class of 1966. Harvard alumni take an active role in the university by electing the members of the Board of Overseers and directors of the Harvard Alumni Association. I am very happy to announce the results of this year's election. Elected as overseers to serve 6-year terms are Peter A. Brook, class of 52, MBA 54, Boston, Massachusetts; Joan Morthland Hutchins, class of 61, Oyster Bay, New York; Theodore B. Lee, class of 54, San Francisco, California; John D. Nichols, class of 53, MBA 55, Chicago, Illinois; and Winifred White Neeser, class of 74, Los Angeles, California. Elected as directors of the Harvard Alumni Association to serve 3-year terms are Paul J. Crowley, class of '53, Wayland, Massachusetts; Sylvia Chase Gerson, AM 70, PhD 75, Fort Myers, Florida; Juanita C. Hernandez, class of '82, JD 85, Austin, Texas; Yuki Moore Laurenti, class of '79, Trenton, New Jersey; Thomas G. McKinley, class of '74, San Francisco, California; and Ellen G. Reeves, class of '83, MEd 86, New York, New York. The Harvard Medal is awarded each year by the HAA for extraordinary service to Harvard University. The Harvard Alumni Association Alumni Awards Committee reviews hundreds of recommendations and selects those individuals whose long-term devotion to Harvard is exemplary and inspirational. It is awarded not only by the HAA, but by the entire university. A description of the 1994 recipients and their many contributions to Harvard is in your programs. President Neil Rudenstein will now present the 1994 medals.
It's my pleasure to present the first of these medals to Peter S. Heller, class of '48, LLB 52. As an overseer and alumni leader, you have brought wisdom and perspective to this university. You win our warm applause for your enthusiasm and generosity in helping Harvard to meet all its aspirations. The next medal is awarded to Raymond Levites, class of '36, Harvard's host at the Bowl, an ardent fan of Harvard basketball. Your affection for Harvard has inspired alumni and students to serve the university that you love so well. Henry Vander Ebb, 42. Former overseer, president of the Harvard Alumni Association, chairman of the Harvard College Fund. Your loyalty and leadership are legendary. Harvard could not have asked for more than you have given.
Thank you, Neil, and congratulations to these 3 fine alumni whose contributions cannot be measured, and our most heartfelt thanks to them. To hear the annual report on university resources, we turn to Robert G. Stone, Jr., class of 1945, an individual well known to Harvard's alumni, friends, and supporters. Bob has served as chairman of the Committee on the University Resources and a member of the corporation since 1975. He is currently on the board of the Harvard Management Company and has served with distinction on countless committees. He co-chaired the Harvard campaign of 1979-1984 and is now one of 3 national campaign chairs for the university campaign of 1994-1999, which was announced May 13th. Bob is truly a person who leads by example, and we're pleased to have him join us today. Bob.
President Rudenstein, President Wilson, Vice President Gore, distinguished guests, fellow alumni, ladies and gentlemen. 3 weeks ago, Harvard launched perhaps the most ambitious fundraising campaign in its history, certainly the most important in our lifetime. The university-wide campaign seeks to raise $2.1 billion during the next 5 years. This campaign is not only a matter of raising money. This campaign is about bringing Harvard together as a community and about advancing a shared vision. Together, through years of intensive academic planning, we have decided on how Harvard might best meet the needs of tomorrow's students, scholars, and world. Together, we've moved forward with a campaign designed to focus on Harvard's excellence, openness, and service. And together, our alumni and friends have really gotten this campaign off to a bang-up start. I'm delighted to report today that as of now, the campaign total already stands at $674,830,000. And that's an increase since we kicked it off of 22 to be exact, $1 million. And as you may have heard the president say, we have to raise about $1 million a day, so we're right on target. Within this total are many individual stories of truly magnificent acts of philanthropy. We could not have hoped for a sturdier foundation upon which to build. We cannot adequately thank those of you who are here who have made campaign pledges already. At the campaign's heart lies Harvard College and the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, whose objectives represent fully 1/2 of the entire campaign. A council of 11 campaign chairs, a 100-member National Major Gifts Committee, and 4,000 Harvard College Fund volunteers are organizing and leading this tremendous endeavor. Led skillfully once again by Paul Weissman, the fund has already surpassed its $50 million goal and achieved 50% alumni participation for this year. The college's recent graduates have been doing their part to ensure Harvard's academic excellence. The senior gift from the class of 1994, made possible by the work of over 200 committee members, the 5th reunion gift of the class of 1989, and the 10th reunion gift of the class of 1984, which establishes new levels in both dollars and participation for the 10th, have all set tremendous examples for future classes to follow. The 15th reunion class of 1979 has raised over $1,560,000, 50% more than any previous 15th. The 20th reunion class of 1974 surpassed all their predecessors by raising more than $1 million. We have with us today many of the leaders from these classes. We're especially thankful for your generosity, energy, and effectiveness, and all that it says about the future of the college. I will ask them to stand and ask you to hold your applause until all of them have been called. Would the following individuals please rise? For the senior gift class of 1994, Samantha Edis and Jabbar Abdi. For the 10th reunion class of 1984, Tony Malkin. For the 15th reunion class of 1979, Claire Pellegrino. And for the 20th reunion class of 1974, Rick Smith. I said earlier that with the beginning of the campaign, this is not and has not been an ordinary fundraising year. A case in point is the 30th reunion class of 1964, which as of today has raised $6,300,000, far surpassing their own 25th reunion gift of 5 years ago. Another is the class of 1954, which has made a tradition of creating new standards at every turn. Their 40th reunion is no different. The new standard for the 40th is $5,500,000. Several tremendous individual performances demand, I think, a special mention. Jim Smith, who's done an outstanding job for the 45th reunion in the class of 1949, and Walter Klein's superb stewardship of the 55th reunion class of 1939. Would the following individuals stand and accept our thanks? Again, please hold your applause until all have been called. Jim Smith of 49, Walter Klein of 39, Marshall Moriarty of the class of 1964. Gentlemen, we salute you. The 50th reunion class gift is a great tradition at Harvard, and the class of 1944, under the leadership of David Arnold, has risen to the occasion of their 50th to further that tradition. Few campaigns have been more personally or imaginatively led. Today, the class has raised more than $5,200,000. Participation exceeds 94%. Thanks to Jay Lafferty, Lou Vorhaus, and a strong committee. David, where are you? Would you please stand and accept our thanks? Just a few years ago, 35th reunions joined the same league as the 25th and the 50th. In the context of the campaign, the class of 1959 will create an entirely new benchmark for the 35th. Define ingenuity, enthusiasm, and energy, and you'll be describing this class. Under the extraordinary leadership of Al Gordon, Glenn Nelson, and Dick Riley, the 35th reunion class of 1959 has raised $8,765,000. Would Glenn please rise and accept our thanks? Thank you, Glenn. The campaign's announcement has had an amazing effect on this year's 25th reunion class. As many of you know, the 25th takes on a life of its own. Add to that the leadership of Fritz Hobbs and Jim Bailey and the spirit of the class of 1969, and you have the ingredients for an explosive finish. In the past 5 weeks, 1969 nearly doubled its gift total to establish all-time records for the 25th and for any Harvard College Fund reunion class. As of today, and actually 2 minutes ago, 1969 has raised over $10 million. Fritz and Jim, please stand again so everybody can see you. Hey. Among the professional schools and across the university, the results leading into the beginning of the campaign have been just as impressive. Every member of Harvard's governing boards, both the Board of Overseers and the corporation, has made a gift or pledge before the campaign's public announcement. Every school met or exceeded its campaign launch goal. In fact, the medical school, the Kennedy School, the School of Public Health, Graduate School of Education, and the Divinity School have to date raised more than 1/3 of their campaign totals. A very encouraging start indeed. The law school campaign for $150 million has now completed its 4th year. The Drive's chairman, Jack Cogan, and Dean Bob Clark have marshaled a strong volunteer organization. To date, through the energetic work of those volunteers, the school's campaign has raised more than $136 million. In short, the university's campaign is off to a tremendous start, and not just among our faculties. This campaign also seeks to secure the futures of our allied institutions, including Memorial Church, Arnold Arboretum, Harvard University Art Museums, Harvard University Library, and the Nieman Foundation. I hope President Rudenstein will forgive me, but I want to leave you with an observation he made in his recent address during the campaign's launch. The president noted that Harvard stands today at an important crossroads. And during such times in the past, as Harvard has challenged itself to reach higher, it is often found that its graduates and friends were in turn challenging the university to become even better still. Without the constant interaction of mutual challenge and response, and shared investment, shared risk, and shared achievement, the university's most important goals could never have been realized. With your continued help and generosity, I'm confident that not only will we fulfill this campaign's ambitious objectives, but that you will challenge us to go further, achieve more, and transform Harvard to an even greater extent than the current plans envision. On behalf of the corporation and the Committee on University Resources and the campaign leadership, I thank you.
Thank you, Bob. We are grateful to you and the people who work with you and all the people you recognize today for your leadership. Please greet the Harvard University Band, which will now perform Harvardiana.
This will be a $600 million year for the university.
That's incredible. Well, now, what do you normally have? What do you say is if there is such a thing as a normal year?
Last year, the cash receipts were $223 million, which was a record that surpassed the prior year that was $203 million. So we've gone from 221 to 270 in a single year in cash receipts. That's university-wide. But then also with the pledges added on top of that through the intensive nucleus fund year, what they call in fundraising parlance the year or 18 months before a drive, it was an incredibly energetic year on the fundraising front, and the leadership and the response from the alumni has been truly breathtaking. So the Harvard Band concluding its Havadiana sequence. I thought concluding. There we go. And as we pick back up, we'll have a report from the President, following President Neil Rudenstein, and then the concluding part of the program today will be the address by Vice President Al Gore. And as they drift off to the wings, we'll be rejoining, I think, the podium in just a moment with Sharon Gagnon. This is a new innovation, I guess, introduced a year or two ago.
I was just going to comment on that, and it sort of, not that it wakes everybody up, but it does brings them into attention, and it does give them a chance to stretch.
One more round of applause for the Harvard Band. Thank you to the Harvard Band. If you open the directory for the HAA directors and committee chairs, the first picture you will see is Neil Rudenstein's. It is a welcoming picture that conveys a sense of humor, adventure, energy, and a lively interest in the surroundings. The picture is consistent with the reality. President Rudenstein's lively interaction with Harvard, its alumni and its friends, his accomplishments, his intelligence and strength of character have earned him the affection and admiration of all the Harvard community and the alumni. A Princeton undergraduate, a Rhodes Scholar in Renaissance literature, a faculty member at Harvard, Dean and Provost at Princeton, Executive Vice President of the Mellon Foundation, Neil Rudenstein came to Harvard almost 3 years ago as president and challenged the university to understand itself and its future. At this time, when higher education is facing great demands, we are fortunate to have the leadership of a president who has a clear vision for Harvard as a university now and for the future, here and throughout the world. I am pleased to introduce the 25th president of Harvard, Neil Rudenstein.
Thank you, good afternoon, and welcome everyone. One of the best aspects of a Harvard commencement is that the fact that the president has a chance to say a few words, but he is not the main speaker. We are very fortunate today to have a member of the 25th reunion class in that role, and while you will be introduced later, I simply want to say welcome to you, Mr. Vice President, and thank you for taking so much time out of your many significant duties to be with us today. This is the end of my third academic year as Harvard's president, and I would like to indulge in some reminiscence, not about myself, but about Harvard and especially its commencements. What were our commencements like in the past? How and why have they changed? What is the meaning of this special ceremony? I want to talk about this informally, I assure you, not systematically and briefly. I want to suggest that unlike many other things in the world, this is actually one event that has improved with time. Commencements and the activities that surround them certainly have had their ups and downs. For a long while, especially in the 17th century, but even later, any recognizable sign of festivity or exuberance was targeted for immediate extinction. President Increase Mather, not widely known for his levity or spirit of abandon, was especially determined about this subject. In 1693, for instance, he and the corporation issued a solemn edict prohibiting members of the senior class from eating plum cakes during commencement week. The penalty was literally payment of a fine of 20 shillings for every offensive slice of plum cake that any student swallowed. There were several subsequent corporation thunderbolts like that during the next 30 years, aimed not only at plum cakes, but also roasted and boiled meats, pies, and distilled liquors of any kind. But nonetheless, the general drift in the direction of unabashed commencement festivity proved very difficult to stop. Looking back, it's difficult to believe that this prolonged suppression of the collective undergraduate id was really very healthy. As events transpired, the id had its own sweet revenge. During the early to mid-1700s, commencement came to look less and less like a requiem and more like a carnival. It became an official holiday for all of Massachusetts. It was nearly the biggest jamboree, except for the 4th of July later on, in the whole state. People came from the entire province and stayed an entire week. The total event was a sort of 18th century academic Woodstock, with here and there a little Latin and quite a bit less Greek. The Cambridge Common, for instance, was filled with tents. Quote, wrote one observer, quote, "Here was a knot of gamblers gathered around a wheel of fortune at a roulette table. Further along, hucksters displayed their wares. There was an auction. Here was a pantomime show. Organ grinders, bears, monkeys, jugglers, and sword swallowers, all mingled in inextricable confusion. From morning till midnight there was gambling, drinking, swearing, dancing, and fighting," unquote. Matters became so bad, in fact, that the sheriff, the very sheriff we saw earlier today, was called in. It quickly became clear, however, that reinforcements would soon be critical. Within a few years, a constable with 6 additional men came to the rescue. By the early 19th century, 2 special judges were assigned to be present throughout commencement week, with an expanded guard of now 20 constables whose mission was to make arrests while the judges dispensed justice right here on the spot. Somewhere around 1830, matters took a different turn. A generous dose of Victorian decorum, like a massive sedative, began slowly to tranquilize this phantasmagoric Fellini-esque sideshow. Thus began the long journey that has finally led us to the present moment. On the way, we were clearly helped by an infusion of later 20th century informality, relaxation, and a little loss of inhibition. The result is what we now possess: spirited, congenial, celebratory, mildly anarchic, but supremely civilized in its ceremony. For several magical hours, the potentially rebellious id, the normally assertive ego, and the massive Harvard collective institutional superego managed to keep one another in check, allowing all of us who gather here to coexist in a state of uniquely crimson equilibrium. What do these hours actually represent, and why do we come back time and again, and why does this day seem to hold so much meaning for us? Well, of course, there is no one reason. There are many reasons. But at bottom, I think the real reason is that education symbolizes so much in our society, and this university has played such a strong, powerful role, not only in our own lives, but in the lives of countless others. It has become a beacon, not only of academic or educational excellence, but of important ideas of freedom. Freedom of the kind that does draw us together in a very special association, not only when we are students, but for a lifetime afterward. A suspenseful major event, one that occurred in September 1943, may help to illustrate what I mean. Harvard undertook to award then an honorary degree to someone who was first described only as a, quote, former naval person, unquote. The event was kept secret until almost the day it occurred. The Second World War was raging. September 1943 was only 9 months before D-Day, and the moment was still full of great danger for the world. On the appointed day, Harvard was filled with crowds as far as one could see. Even so, very few people really could quite believe that the Right Honorable Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill, Prime Minister of England, in the midst of all this hazardous and his weighty duties, would actually make a pilgrimage to a small city called Cambridge, Massachusetts, mainly to participate in a ceremony in which he would receive an extremely small piece of parchment. Of course, the Prime Minister did arrive. The degree was conferred in Sanders Theater, and David McCord, the editor of the Harvard Alumni Bulletin at the time, described the scene as Mr. Churchill rose to speak. On either side of him towered the white marble statues of President Quincy and the colonial patriot James Otis. The Prime Minister searched for his glasses with hands that reached more happily for a cigar. As he began to talk, his mobile face and restless arms gave fluid emphasis to what he was saying. At one point, McCord reported, Churchill spoke with special emphasis. And here, stated the Prime Minister, here let me say how proud we ought to be, young and old, to be living in a tremendous, thrilling, formative epoch in the human story, and how fortunate it was for the world that when these great trials came upon us, there was a generation that terror could not conquer and brutal violence could not enslave. The cheering reverberated, Mr. McCord wrote, throughout the echoes of the old theater. The power of the Prime Minister's words had found their mark. He looked pleased, unquote. Today, as we remember that moment in late 1943, I think we can see it was no accident that Mr. Churchill chose a university, and particularly Harvard, for his secret pilgrimage. He did so because he wanted to talk about the coming victory, which he already foresaw, over forces that did not simply want to win, but also wanted to destroy genuine freedom of thought, as well as entire populations of people. By speaking at Harvard, the Prime Minister's message about true intellectual as well as other kinds of freedom would be unmistakable. At a university, he would not be identifying himself or his message with any particular partisan point of view or with any specific religious creed or doctrine or what we might call today a special interest. In other words, he deliberately chose a place that could symbolize in its purest form the very basic freedoms and values that he and others were fighting to preserve. Respect for individuals and their independence, especially for the right to inquire and think and express oneself freely, for the conviction that other individuals and peoples, not just one's own, must also be left free, must be treated with decency and dignity so that they too can lead fruitful and peaceful lives. Now, of course, many institutions in a democratic society like ours are committed to these ideals and help to carry them out. But the university is that one single institution in a society deliberately and fully dedicated all the time to the life of the mind and all its associated humane values across all fields of inquiry and learning. It is the one place where the free and disciplined activity of the mind and the broad education of individuals lies at the very center of the institution's purposes and very reason for being, and where these activities are constantly protected as well as nourished. So as we watch and participate in the festivities of our commencements, the awarding of the degrees and prizes, the processions and the academic gowns, the vestigial Latin that is read but that no one virtually ever understands. When we take part in all this festivity, we can also take pleasure in its different meanings. Some of these meanings are personal and familial. We have come to be with our children and grandchildren to see them graduate from Harvard, or perhaps to graduate ourselves, or we have come to join in reunions, to see old friends, and to visit quadrangles and courtyards and rooms where we once walked and talked and lived and rejoiced. But we are also here because, as the former naval person and prime minister recognized, this university is one of the great free sanctuaries in our modern life. It is quintessentially a place not only where students and faculty pursue their studies, but where graduates and friends and families of every generation come together, from every nation and every part of this nation, of different religions and races, with different points of view, and where all of you will always be welcome and always be invited to return and feel at home. Such sanctuaries and associations are, as I think you know, extremely rare in life and on this planet. Very few great ones exist or have ever existed anywhere. To possess an institution like this one that gathers us under the common banner of values as profound and as necessary as genuine freedom of thought and education, an institution that is generously inclusive and does not ask at the front door what party or sector group you belong to and why. An institution that can therefore symbolize the possibility and ideal of unity, even if we do not always realize it, of a wholeness greater than the scattered parts of our unsteadied world and often fragmented parts of our individual lives. To be able to come together at a university that today joins in fellowship the members of Harvard's 50th reunion class who participated in a war that united the country, with the members of Harvard's 25th reunion class who experienced a very different war that sometimes divided the country. To have such an institution anywhere, at any time, in any society, is itself a great treasure and worthy of our constant care. To be able, finally, to be genuine participants in this university, full members of its community, part of the long sweep of its continuity over centuries, to be true participants as we are, that is something very fortunate indeed. So let us relish and rejoice in what we have been given, in all that it stands for. By all means, let us consume as many plum cakes as we can possibly digest, and imbibe some moderate portion of distilled liquors, as well as the atmosphere of freedom all around us. Linger, savor the place while you are here. Return whenever you can. This is one of your homes, one of your permanent spiritual residences, always open at the front door. Thank you for coming. Farewell and Godspeed.
Thank you, Neil, for a wonderful address. Please rise and join in the singing of Radcliffe Now We Rise to Greet Thee.
Radcliffe
25 years ago, Vice President Al Gore received a degree in government with honors from Harvard College. Today, he returns as the first incumbent Vice President of the United States to be a Harvard commencement speaker and the recipient of an honorary degree. The intervening years have been a journey, from Harvard to Vietnam, then home to Tennessee and graduate study at Vanderbilt Divinity School and Vanderbilt Law School in Nashville. There, Al Gore, the former editor of the Dunster House newspaper, became a journalist for the Tennessean in Nashville. The former chair of the Harvard Freshman Council and member of the Harvard Undergraduate Council, was elected to 4 successive terms in the United States House of Representatives, was twice elected U.S. Senator, and then became Vice President of the United States. He married Mary Elizabeth Tipper Gore, and they became the parents of Corinna, class of '95, Kristen, Sarah, and Albert Gore III. Along the way, Vice President Gore became an expert and leader in issues of technology, arms control, and healthcare, and an advocate for consumers and taxpayers. His interest in education extended to service as an active and inspiring member of the Harvard Board of Overseers. The years have also been an intellectual and spiritual journey, as the insights Vice President Gore gained from Harvard professors such as Roger Revelle and Eric Erickson developed through new studies and insights into a profound concern for ecology and the human spirit. His bestseller book, Earth in the Balance, describes this journey and the conclusions to which it brought him. Near the end of the book, he writes, "Both in our personal lives and in our political decisions, we have an ethical duty to pay attention, resist distraction, be honest with one another, and accept responsibility for what we do, whether as individuals or together." It is a very great honor to introduce Vice President Al Gore.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sharon Gagnon, President Neil Rudenstein and Angelica Rudenstein, members of the Harvard Corporation Board and Board of Overseers, faculty, students, alumni, distinguished guests. Before we begin, I would like to bring your attention to a small item on the inside cover of the June 4th issue of the Boston Globe magazine. Correction. The May 29th cover story on Vice President Al Gore suggested he is funny. He is not. The Globe regrets the error. I'm used to that. It's no secret that I ran for president in 1988, although it seemed like one at the time. It was a character-building experience. I learned a lot of new jokes. Al Gore is so boring. His Secret Service code name is Al Gore. If you use a strobe light, it looks like Al Gore is moving. Al Gore is so stiff, racks buy their suits off him. Al Gore is an inspiration to the millions of Americans who suffer from Dutch elm disease. How can you tell Al Gore from a room full of Secret Service agents? He is the stiff one. I've heard most of them, but every time I hear a new one, I always have the same reaction. Very funny, Tipper. In order to escape that demeaning ridicule and reclaim my dignity, I decided to run for Vice President of the United States of America. It has been an interesting experience, one which has not taken me entirely away from the Senate. You may have noticed that I've had a chance to vote a few times in the last 16 months. The experience has made me a more optimistic person because I've noticed a pattern that the news media has almost completely missed. But if you watch on C-SPAN, you will find this pattern holds. Every time I vote, we win. It works like a charm. A Harvard commencement is a special occasion. How could anyone not have been thrilled by this morning's assembly? 25,000 people packed into Harvard Yard to celebrate one of the great occasions of life. I loved it all, and I love this great gathering again, and I've especially enjoyed my 25th reunion. I am so proud of my class of 1969. We're the ones who beat Yale by a tie score, if you remember. I remember the 25th reunion class when they came in 1969, walking around the yard with their children. They seemed like ordinary people. They seemed older then than we seem now. But in fact, they were responsible for one of the saving triumphs of modern civilization. The class of 1944 was part of the generation President Clinton commemorated this week in Normandy, the group that went from Harvard to boot camp and basic training, and from there were transfused into the weary divisions battling across Europe. Only 11 members of the class were present at graduation. All the rest had by then already left to enlist. Some did not come back to their reunion. Their names are carved in stone in Memorial Church just behind me. Many did come back, and some of them are here again today for their 50th reunion, and we salute you. Back in 1969, I have to say that our graduating class was in no mood to salute or to celebrate your sacrifice and your achievement. But we understand clearly, ever more so, without question, that because of your service, the world changed in 1944. Indeed, our world a half-century later is still shaped by the events of that tumultuous and triumphant year. Today, I want to tell you why I believe the world also changed in important and enduring ways because of the events of 1969. a year of contradiction and contrast, of glory and bitterness. In July 1969, 1/4 of the population of the world watched on live television while Neil Armstrong brought his space module Eagle down to the Sea of Tranquility, slowly climbed down a ladder and pressed his left boot into the untrod surface of the moon. But 1969 was also the year Charles Manson and his followers made the innocent words helter-skelter symbols of a bloodbath. 1969 was the year of music in the rain at Woodstock and the year of the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. While we went to class and heard lectures and wrote papers and listened to music and talked and played sports and fell in love, the war in Vietnam was blasting that small country apart physically and ripping America apart emotionally. A dark mood of uncertainty from that tragic conflict clouded every single day we were here. The year began with the inauguration of Richard Nixon, a ceremony that seemed to confirm for at least some of us the finality of a change in our national mood and ratify the results of what seemed like a downward spiral that had begun with the assassination of President Kennedy 5 years, 2 months, and 2 days earlier. Throughout our 4 years at Harvard, the nation's spirits sank. The race riot in Watts was fresh in our minds when we registered as freshmen. Though our hopes were briefly raised by the passage of civil rights legislation and the promise of a war on poverty, the war in Vietnam grew steadily more ominous and consumed the resources that were needed to make good on the extravagant promises for dramatic progress here at home. The year before our graduation, our hopes were once again briefly raised by the political insurgency we helped inspire and that we hoped might somehow end our national nightmare. Then, months later, those hopes were cruelly crushed by the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr., renewed race riots, this time nationwide, and then the assassination of Robert Kennedy, and what seemed like the death of any hope that we might find our way back to the entrance of the dark tunnel into which our nation had wandered. All of this cast a shadow over each of our personal futures. My personal attitudes toward the career I have chosen changed dramatically during that time. I left Harvard in 1969, disillusioned by what I saw happening in our country, and certain of only one thing about my future: I would never, ever go into politics. After returning from Vietnam and after 7 years as a journalist, I rekindled my interest in public service. But I believe the same disillusioning forces that for a time drove me away from politics have continued for the country as a whole. After all, the war raged on for 5 more years, and the downward spiral in our national mood reached a new low when the Watergate scandal led to the growing belief that our government was telling lies to our people. The resignation of President Nixon, his subsequent pardon, the oil shocks, 21% interest rates, hostages held seemingly interminably and then swapped in return for weapons provided to terrorists who called us the Great Satan, a quadrupling of our national debt in only a dozen years, a growing gap between rich and poor, steadily declining real incomes, all continued an avalanche of negative self-images which have profoundly changed the way Americans view their government. A recent analysis of public opinion polling data covering the years since my class came here to Harvard demonstrates the cumulative change in our national mood. When my class entered as freshmen in the fall of 1965, the percentage of Americans who believed that government generally tries to do the right thing was over 60%. Today, it is only 10%. The percentage of Americans believing then that government favors the rich and powerful was 29%. Today, it is 80%. These trends, let me emphasize, hold true for Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and liberals. This may be apocryphal, but someone actually claimed the other day that the situation has gotten so bad, they conducted a new poll and asked people about their current level of cynicism. 18% said they were more cynical than 5 years ago, 9% thought they were less cynical, and 72% suspected the question was some kind of government ploy and refused to answer. Democracy stands or falls on a mutual trust. Government's trust of the people and the people's trust of the governments they elect. And yet at the same time, democratic culture and politics have always existed in a strange blend of credulity and skepticism. Indeed, a certain degree of enduring skepticism about human nature lies at the foundation of our representative democracy. James Madison argued successfully in the Federalist Papers that the United States Constitution should create a protective balance of power among the factions that were bound to rise in any society. Democracy did not mean unity in the body politic. People do have reasonable differences. Human ignorance, pride, and selfishness would, after all, always be with us, prompting inevitable divisions and conflicting ambitions. Yet freedom and order could be protected with safeguards, ensuring that no one branch of government and no one group or faction would be able to dictate to all the rest. We were the first large republic to build a nation on the revolutionary premise that the people are sovereign and that the freedom to dispute, debate, disagree, and quarrel with each other created a fervent love of country that could hold us together against the world. It is still a revolutionary premise, and it is still built on a skeptical view of human nature that refuses to believe in perfection in intellect, logic, knowledge, or morals in any human being. And so the ceaseless American yearning for the ideal life has always stumbled uneasily over a persistent American skepticism about the parties and leaders who claim to have the wisdom and ability to guide us to our destiny. We revere our institutions, and at the same time we watch our leaders as though we were hawks circling overhead, eager to dive with claws extended onto any flaw or failure that we see. Even our most beloved president, George Washington, wrote in his last letter to Thomas Jefferson, dated July 6, 1796, "I had no conception that every act of my administration would be tortured in such exaggerated form and indecent terms as could scarcely be applied to a Nero, a notorious defaulter, or even a common pickpocket." Our feelings about ourselves as a people are mixed. We Americans have often been proud to the point of cocky arrogance, but we have never been able to hide indefinitely from what we do wrong. Our failures eat at our conscience, and our sins itch under the showy garb of our achievements and prevent us from being complacent. Faith in the future and skepticism about every person or group who offers to lead us there, these conflicting forces work together to shape the American character. And yet these forces must remain in a rough balance of emotional power. If we receive too heavy a dose of concentrated self-doubt and too many repetitive injuries to our confidence in self-government, then our normal, healthy skepticism can fall into a mire of cynicism, and we start to question the ability of any human community to live up to the democratic ideals that we proclaim. Once it is widely accepted, cynicism, the stubborn, unwavering disbelief in the possibility of good, can become a malignant habit in democracy. The skeptic may finally be persuaded by the facts, but the cynic never, for he is so deeply invested in the conviction that virtue cannot prevail over the deep and essential evil in all things and all people. The last time public cynicism sank to its present depth may have been exactly 100 years ago, when Mark Twain said, "There is no distinctly Native American criminal class except Congress." That was a time when Americans felt the earth moving under their feet. Debt and depression forced farmers off the land, and into cities they found cold and strange, and into factories where human beings became scarcely more than the extensions of machines. Cynicism was soon abroad in the land. We are now in the midst of another historic and unsettling economic transformation. Now the information revolution is leading to a loss of jobs in many factories as computers and automation replace human labor. After World War II, 35% of America's employment was on the factory floor. Today, fewer than 17% of our labor force works in manufacturing, with a larger output. Just as most of those who lost their jobs on the farm 100 years ago eventually found new work in factories, so today new jobs are opening up in new occupations created by the information revolution. But this time, the transition is taking place more swiftly, and the economic adjustment is, for many, more difficult and disorienting. In this respect, we Americans are actually doing better than most other nations. Every industrial society in the world is having enormous difficulty in creating a sufficient number of new jobs, even when their economies heat up. So, not surprisingly, public cynicism about leadership has soared in every industrial country throughout the world. History is a precarious source of lessons. Nevertheless, I am reminded that similar serious economic problems prevailed in Athens in the 4th century BC when the philosophical school we now know as Cynicism was born. The Cynics were fed up with their society and its social conventions and wanted everybody to know it. The root of the word cynic is the same as the Greek word for dog, and some scholars say the Cynics got their name because they barked at society. Sounds almost like some of our talk radio shows I've heard. In a time of social fragmentation, vulgarity becomes a way of life. To be shocking becomes more important and often more profitable than to be civil or creative or truly original. Given the vulgarity that fragmentation breeds, cynicism seems almost irresistible. Sometimes it even looks like a refuge of sanity, a rational response to a world seemingly driven by the fast hustle, the pseudo-event, the rage for sensationalism. In any event, cynicism represented then and represents now a secession from society, a dissolution of the bonds between people and families and communities, an indifference to the fate of anything or anyone beyond the self. Cynicism is deadly. It bites everything it can reach, like a dog with a foot caught in a trap, and then it devours itself. It drains us of the will to improve. It diminishes our public spirit. It saps our inventiveness. It withers our souls. Cynics often see themselves as merely being world-weary. There is no new thing under the sun, the cynics say. They have not only seen everything, they have seen through everything. They claim that their weariness is wisdom, but it is usually merely posturing. Their weariness seems to be most effective when they consider the aspirations of those beneath them who have neither power nor influence nor wealth. For these unfortunates, nothing can be done, the cynics declare. Hope for society as a whole is considered an affront to rationality. The notion that the individual has a responsibility for the community is considered a dangerous radicalism. And those who toil in quiet places and for little reward to lift up the fallen, to comfort the afflicted, and to protect the weak are regarded as fools. Ultimately, however, the life of a cynic is lonely and self-destructive. It is our human nature to make connections with other human beings. The gift of sympathy for one another is one of the most powerful sentiments we ever feel. If we do not have it, we're not human. Indeed, it is so powerful that the cynic who denies it goes to war with himself. A few years ago, Shelby Steele wrote about his pain as a child when he was mistreated by a teacher who called him stupid. He said that the teacher's declaration created a terrible reality for him. If the teacher told him he was stupid, he thought he must be stupid. Let me quote what he says. I mention this experience as an example of how one's innate capacity for insecurity is expanded and deepened, of how a disbelieving part of the self is brought to life and forever joined to the believing self. As children, we are all wounded in some way and to some degree by the wild world we encounter. From these wounds, a disbelieving anti-self is born, an internal antagonist and saboteur that embraces the world's negative view of us, that believes our wounds are justified by our own unworthiness, and that entrenches itself as a lifelong voice of doubt. Well, I believe that in a similar way, our nation's attitude toward itself can be and is shaped by national experiences. For example, the heady and triumphant victories of 1944 enlarged our confidence and helped us build the post-war world. And by contrast, during the days when my class was here at Harvard, America's capacity for insecurity was expanded and deepened by wounds to our national confidence. An unnamed alumnus of my class was quoted this morning on the front page of the Boston Globe as saying, "I lost faith in the United States as a force for good in the world." We are still trying to heal those wounds burned into our body politic by assassinations, the Vietnam War, the riots, the cultural conflicts, and by the terrible conviction that people sworn to uphold our Constitution were not telling us the truth. E.J. Dionne recently wrote, "Just as the Civil War dominated American political life for decades after it ended, so is the cultural civil war of the 1960s, with all its tensions and contradictions, shaping our politics today." As the public's willingness to believe the worst increases, that is to say, as cynicism increases, the only political messages that seem to affect the outcome of elections are those that seek to paint the opposition as a gang of bandits and fools who couldn't be trusted to pour water out of a boot if the directions were written on the heel. This fixation on character assassination, rather than on defining issues, feeds the voracious appetite of tabloid journalism for scandal and the growing appetites of other journalistic outlets for the same sort of fare. A few years ago, the Czech leader Václav Havel wrote these prescient words: "They say a nation has the politicians it deserves. In some sense, that is true. Politicians are truly a mirror of the society and a kind of embodiment of its potential. At the same time, paradoxically, the opposite is also true. Society is a mirror of its politicians. It is largely up to the politicians which social forces they choose to liberate and which they choose to suppress, whether they choose to rely on the good in each citizen or on the bad. But it is crucial for us, and especially those of us in public service, to understand that cynicism also can arise when political leaders cavalierly promise to do good things and then fail to deliver. The inability to redeem glib and reckless promises about issues like education, race relations, and crime can add to the disturbing and growing doubts among the American people about our ability to shape our destiny. Over the long haul, sustainable hope is as important to the health of self-government as sustainable development is for ecological health. Dashed hopes poison our political will just as surely as chemical waste can poison drinking water aquifers deep in the ground. When hopes are repeatedly dashed and a nation's instinct for self-government is repeatedly injured, national cohesion can dissipate. The results are for all to see. At home and abroad, the weakening of bonds between the individual and the larger society creates a vacuum quickly filled by other group identities based on race or clan or sect or tribe or gang. Some distinguishing quality, often physical, is used to demarcate group identity. These differences become standards raised to summon the group to war against others slightly different from themselves. It is one of the strange perversities of this process that the smaller the difference, the more ferocious the hatred, and the more hideous the massacres that follow. Look at our bleeding world. Hutus versus Tutsis, Bosnian Serbs versus Bosnian Croats and Bosnian Muslims, all of whom often seem to others indistinguishable, but who themselves are driven to mindless ferocity by what Freud called the narcissism of slight difference, what St. Augustine called pride, the mother of all sins, and about which William Butler Yeats said in a famous poem, "Things fall apart, the sinner cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." Make no mistake, just as repeated injuries to our national esteem can seriously jeopardize our ability to solve the problems which confront us, so at the global level, the convergence of too much chaos and horror in the world, of too many Bosnias and Rwandas, can seriously damage the ability of our global civilization to get a grip on the essential task of righting itself and regaining a measure of control over our destiny as a species. Where then do we search for healing? What is our strategy for reconciliation with our future? And where is our vision for sustainable hope? I have come to believe that our healing can be found in our relationships to one another and in a shared commitment to higher purposes in the face of adversity. At the 1992 Democratic Convention, I talked about a personal event that fundamentally changed the way I viewed the world, an accident that almost killed our son. I will not repeat the story here today, except to say that the most important lesson for me was that people I didn't even know reached out to me and to my family to lift us up in their hearts and in their prayers with compassion of such intensity that I felt it as a palpable force, a healing reaching out of those multitudes of caring souls and falling on us like a mantle of divine grace. Since then, I have dwelled on our connections to one another and on the fact that as human beings, we are astonishingly similar in the most important parts of our existence. I don't know what barriers in my soul had prevented me from understanding emotionally that basic connection to others until after they reached out to me in the dark of my family's sorrow. But I suppose it was a form of cynicism on my part. If cynicism is based on alienation and fragmentation, I believe the brokenness that separates the cynic from others is the outward sign of an inner division between the head and the heart. There is something icily and unnaturally intellectual about the cynic. This isolation of intellect from feelings and emotions is the essence of his condition. For the cynic, feelings are as easily separated from the reality others see as ethics are separated from behavior and as life is cut off from any higher purpose. Having felt their power in my own life, I believe that sympathy and compassion are revolutionary forces in the world at large and that they are working now. A year after the accident, when our family's healing process was far advanced, I awoke early one Sunday morning in 1990, turned on the television set, and watched in amazement as another healing process began when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. Last month, I attended his inauguration when he was sworn in as president of the new South Africa in what was a stupendous defeat for cynicism in our time. Many there were moved to tears. Many there were moved to tears as he introduced three special friends he had invited to attend the ceremony. His jailers, whom he had gotten to know across the chasm which divided him from them and with whom he had become personal friends. 9 months ago, I witnessed the healing power of a handshake on the south lawn of the White House as Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat began the tentative process of reconciliation and peace in a relationship hitherto characterized by only hatred and war. Less than 5 years ago, the world watched in amazement as the Berlin Wall was dismantled and statues of dictators toppled throughout East and Central Europe, and as authoritarian communist governments were replaced by market democracies alert to the needs of their people. Less than 3 weeks ago, for the first time in almost 50 years, nuclear missiles were no longer targeted on American cities, a small but important step in the continuing reversal of the nuclear arms race that has long served as the cynic's ace in the hole. There is, in other words, a respectable argument that the cynics who are barking so loudly are simply wrong. For my part, In the 25 years since my Harvard graduation, I have come to believe in hope over despair, striving over resignation, faith over cynicism. I believe in the power of knowledge to make the world a better place. Cynics may say human beings have never learned anything from history. All that is truly useful about knowledge is that it can provide you with advantages over the pack. But the cynics are wrong. We have the capacity to learn from our mistakes and transcend our past. Indeed, in this very place, we have been taught that truth, veritas, can set us free. I believe in finding fulfillment in family, for the family is the true center of a meaningful life. Cynics may say all families are confining and ultimately dysfunctional. The very idea of family is outdated and unworkable. But the cynics are wrong. It is in our families that we learn to love one another. I believe in serving God and trying to understand and obey God's will for our lives. Cynics may wave the idea away, saying God is a myth, useful in providing comfort to the ignorant and in keeping them obedient. I know in my heart, beyond all arguing and beyond any doubt, that the cynics are wrong. I believe in working to achieve social justice and freedom for all. Cynics may scorn this notion as naive, claiming that all our efforts for equal opportunity, for justice, for freedom, have created only a wasteland of failed hopes. But here too, the cynics are wrong. Freedom is our destiny, justice is our guide, and we shall overcome. I believe in protecting the Earth's environment against an unprecedented onslaught. Cynics may laugh out loud and say there is no utility in a stand of thousand-year-old trees, a fresh breeze, or a mountain stream. But the cynics are wrong. We are part of God's creation and not separate from it. I believe in you, all of you here, individually and as a group. The cynics say you are motivated principally by greed, and that ultimately you will care for nothing other than yourselves. But the cynics are wrong. You care about each other, you cherish freedom, you treasure justice, you seek truth. And finally, I believe in America. Cynics will say we have lost our way, that the American century is at its end. But again, the cynics are wrong. America is still the model to which the world aspires. Almost everywhere in the world, the values that the United States has proclaimed, defended, and tried to live are now rising. In the end, we face a fundamental choice: cynicism or faith. Each equally capable of taking root in our souls and shaping our lives as self-fulfilling prophecies. I believe we must open our hearts to each other and build on all the vast and creative possibilities of America. This is a task for a confident people, which is what we have been throughout our history and what we still are in our deepest character. I believe in our future.
Thank you, Vice President Gore. As your visit here today is an historic event, your words will live in our memories long beyond this day and will be an inspiration to us. Please stand and join me now as we sing Fair Harvard. The words are in your program.
It was an interesting talk of describing life as a fight between a natural tendency toward cynicism on one hand and the corresponding tendency toward faith in the other, both of which can become self-fulfilling prophecies, as he said, in the life of a people, individuals, and a nation. He started his talk by noting the enormous sacrifice of those people who were celebrating their 25th reunion at the time of his graduation. That would have been the class of 1944, which of course he noted had only 11 graduates attending the commencement ceremonies because so many had left to fight. And
that was interesting, Tom, and because the 25th reunion people who are right down here in front of us just almost rose as one to applaud them.
Well, it was an interesting phenomenon because it started with the people on the platform, then the 25th reunion stood up, and then slowly the entire gathering stood up to applaud as sort of that bridging exercise of the class of 69 recognizing publicly, perhaps in a ritualistic way for the first time, the extraordinary achievements and sacrifice of the class of 44. It's been an interesting period now, this month of June, as we've lived through the D-Day commemorations, the president's trip to Paris, to France, to Europe, and now, perhaps in ways that are more graphic and dramatic here, a reconciliation of an age and generation gap that has been very painful in this society.
Thank you, alumni, friends, and guests, for joining in the 1994 meeting of the Harvard Alumni Association. I adjourn this meeting until June 8, 1995.
And so with the closing gavel, it brings to an end another meeting of the Harvard Alumni Association. And a very interesting combination of talks together. The president talking about why do we come here to these commencements, why are these rituals important, and citing the fundamental core reason being freedom, the freedom of expression and the freedom of thought, which universities represent a real sanctuary in the world today. And then Al Gore talking about the struggle in society today, the fight between cynicism on one hand and hope and faith on the other, and gave people a lot to think about, I think. Well, with the tolling of the bells in the background, we are, I guess, just about ready to bid you a fond farewell for yet another year. But we'll see you back here on June 8th of 1995. And until then, for Ed Carey, this is Tom Reardon wishing you a very pleasant good afternoon from Harvard Yard.